Ambassador Park Hannah's hands trembled slightly as she stood before the massive crystalline table in the Galactic Council chamber. Above her, the domed ceiling displayed a perfect simulation of the galaxy itself, billions of stars rotating slowly in an endless dance. Around the table sat representatives from 47 different species, some humanoid, others so alien that Hannah still struggled to understand their basic biology even after months of preparation. The chamber fell silent as Chairman Vex raised one of his 4 elongated arms. His species, the Korthan, had dominated galactic politics for over 3 centuries. His skin shimmered with a pale blue luminescence, and all 4 of his eyes focused on Hannah with an intensity that made her feel like an insect under examination. Ambassador Park, Vex's voice emerged from the translation device embedded in the table. Earth's signature is the final formality required. This treaty represents 5 years of negotiation between the Korthan Empire and the Vex Collective. It will end 2 centuries of Cold War and bring lasting peace to the galaxy. Hannah looked down at the datapad in her hands. 10,000 pages of dense legal text written in 17 different languages. She had spent 3 months reading every single word, often staying awake until dawn in her small quarters aboard the station. Her team back on Earth had helped analyze the most complex sections, breaking down the archaic legal terminology into something comprehensible. What they found had kept her awake for very different reasons. Chairman, Hannah began, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach, I have read the entire treaty as required by Earth's diplomatic protocols. Excellent, Vex replied, gesturing toward the signing platform. Then let us conclude this historic moment. I cannot sign this treaty. The words hung in the air for 3 full seconds before the chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates leaped to their feet, or their equivalent appendages. The Rylan ambassador, whose species resembled giant mantises, clicked her mandibles in agitation. The Tovan representatives, short beings covered in crystalline scales, began shouting in their musical language. Even the normally calm Myra delegation stirred, their telepathic surprise washing over the room like a cold wave. Lord Tamine of the Korthan Empire rose from his seat with deliberate slowness. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body covered in thick armored plates that had evolved for combat on his harsh homeworld. Unlike the diplomatic Chairman Vex, Tamine had built his reputation through military conquest before transitioning to politics. Everyone in the chamber knew his history. Ambassador Park, Tamine's voice was like stone grinding against stone. Perhaps you misunderstood the question. This is not a debate. Every species in this chamber has already approved the treaty. Earth's approval is a formality required by protocol, nothing more. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she had prepared for this moment. She activated her datapad and projected a holographic display above the central table. The image showed page 7429 of the treaty, section 12, subsection 47. The text was written in archaic Korthan legal script that few modern scholars could even read. This section, Hannah said, highlighting several paragraphs, establishes what the treaty calls the Resource Redistribution Protocol for Developmental Worlds. It requires that any species classified as developing must provide annual tribute to the Council. 30% of all mineral resources, 20% of agricultural output, 15% of manufactured goods. Standard provisions, interrupted Ambassador Rylan, though her mandibles clicked nervously. All members contribute to collective security. This isn't a contribution, Hannah continued, pulling up another section. It's mandatory tribute with no expiration date. And here, in section 7431, the Council is granted authority to relocate populations from developing worlds if deemed necessary for optimal resource allocation or strategic stability. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some delegates leaned forward to examine the projected text more carefully. Others exchanged glances with their neighboring representatives. Chairman Vex's skin flickered between blue and purple, a sign of agitation in his species. You are taking an extremely narrow interpretation of diplomatic language, Ambassador. These provisions exist to ensure galactic stability and fair distribution of resources. With respect, Chairman, I am reading exactly what is written. Hannah zoomed in on specific phrases. The treaty grants the Council power to determine which species are classified as developing. It provides no appeals process. No limitations on how long a species remains in that status. And most concerning, it allows the Council to relocate entire populations without requiring consent from the affected species. She paused, letting her words sink in before delivering the final blow. My homeworld spent centuries fighting against this exact system. We called it colonialism. Powerful nations claimed they were helping weaker ones while systematically extracting their resources and controlling their populations. Millions of my ancestors died fighting for the principle that no people should be subject to another's rule without genuine consent. I will not dishonor their sacrifice by signing a treaty that recreates that system on a galactic scale. Lord Tamin's armored plates clicked together as he moved around the table toward Hannah. She forced herself to stand firm even though every instinct screamed at her to step back. Your world is nothing, Tamin said quietly, which somehow made his words more threatening than shouting. Earth has been part of the galactic community for barely 2 centuries. You have no military worth mentioning. Your economy depends entirely on our technology and trade networks. You exist in this chamber because we allow it. Because we chose to extend the hand of civilization to a species that was still fighting primitive wars when we were building star empires. He loomed over her, close enough that she could smell the mineral scent of his armored skin. You have one choice, Ambassador. Sign the treaty and maintain Earth's place in galactic society. Or refuse and condemn your species to isolation. No trade. No technology transfers. No protection. Just your lonely little world spinning in the dark, wondering what could have been. Hannah met his gaze without flinching. She thought of her grandmother, who had been a refugee during Earth's last major conflict. Who had told stories of soldiers demanding obedience, of governments claiming they knew what was best for people they'd never met, of the slow crushing weight of living under someone else's rules. Earth's answer is no, Hannah said clearly. We will not sign this treaty. The chamber erupted again, but this time Hannah barely heard it. She had just made the most important decision of her life, possibly the most important decision in Earth's entire history. And she had absolutely no idea if it was the right one. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere as dawn broke over the Swiss Alps. Hannah pressed her face against the window, watching her homeworld grow larger. She had left Geneva 3 weeks ago as a nervous diplomat hoping to make history. She was returning as the woman who might have doomed humanity. Her communication device had been flooded with messages during the journey home. Some called her brave. Others called her reckless. A few called her a traitor. She had stopped reading them after the first 100. The shuttle touched down at Geneva International Spaceport just after 6 in the morning local time. Hannah expected a quiet arrival, maybe a small security team to escort her to a debriefing. Instead, she found thousands of people waiting outside the terminal. Some held signs supporting her decision. Others demanded her immediate arrest. Police in riot gear formed barriers between the two groups. Secretary General Kim Dae waited inside the terminal with a security escort. He was a tall man in his 60s with gray hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had survived 3 planetary crises. He smiled when he saw Hannah, though the expression did not quite reach his eyes. Welcome home, Ambassador, Kim said, shaking her hand. I hope you are ready for a very long day. They climbed into an armored transport that sped through Geneva's streets toward the United Parliament building. Through the tinted windows, Hannah could see more protesters. Every major intersection had crowds gathering. News drones hovered overhead, broadcasting everything to billions of viewers worldwide. How bad is it? Hannah asked quietly. Kim pulled up a holographic display showing global polling data. 43% support your decision. 39% oppose it. 18% are undecided. The numbers shift by the hour. He paused. Parliament meets in 2 hours to vote on whether to support your refusal or disavow it and attempt reconciliation with the Council. Hannah felt her stomach drop. And if they disavow me? Then you will likely face charges for exceeding your authority. Earth will formally apologize to the Council and request permission to sign the treaty under modified terms. Kim met her eyes. Whatever terms the Council chooses to offer, which will certainly be worse than the original. The transport pulled into the underground garage beneath the Parliament building. As they rode the elevator up, Kim handed Hannah a tablet containing the agenda for the emergency session. You will speak first, he explained. 15 minutes to explain your reasoning. Then representatives from each continental federation will debate. The vote comes at the end. You need a simple majority to avoid prosecution, but we are pushing for a strong mandate, at least 70% support. That seems impossible, Hannah said. Kim smiled slightly. 3 days ago I would have agreed. But something interesting has been happening. Do you remember Dr. Yoon Suho? Hannah nodded. The Vex scientist who had sent her the encrypted files about species exploited under previous council treaties. His information leaked, Kim continued. Not from us. Someone else got hold of it and released everything to public networks across Earth. People are reading stories about the Rylan homeworld being strip-mined. About Tovan children taken for education and never returned. About entire Myra cities relocated to make room for Corthan military bases. The elevator doors opened onto a corridor filled with parliamentary staff rushing between offices. Everyone stopped to stare at Hannah as she passed. Some faces showed admiration. Others showed fear or anger. The Parliament chamber was a massive circular room with seats arranged in concentric rings rising up from the central floor. Representatives from 243 nations filled the space, along with their advisors and staff. Cameras mounted on floating drones captured every angle for the global broadcast. Secretary General Kim took his position at the central podium and called the session to order. The room fell silent except for the quiet hum of translation devices converting his words into dozens of languages. "We gather today to decide Earth's future," Kim began. 3 days ago, Ambassador Park Hannah refused to sign the Galactic Peace Treaty. She did so because she believed the treaty contained provisions that would effectively make Earth a tributary state subject to Council authority. The question before this body is simple. Do we support her decision or do we disavow it and seek reconciliation with the Council? He gestured for Hannah to approach the podium. She walked down to the central floor, acutely aware of thousands of eyes watching her every movement. The main display screen showed her face projected large enough for everyone in the chamber to see clearly. Hannah gripped the sides of the podium to steady her shaking hands. She had prepared a speech during the shuttle ride home, carefully crafted arguments about sovereignty and legal precedent. But looking at the faces surrounding her, representatives who would decide not just her fate but humanity's, the prepared words felt hollow. She spoke from her heart instead. "I am 32 years old," Hannah began quietly. "I have spent my entire adult life training for diplomatic service. I studied the history of every major treaty Earth has signed in the past 3 centuries. I learned 17 languages. I memorized council protocols until I could recite them in my sleep. I wanted nothing more than to make my world proud by representing humanity among the stars." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I stood in that council chamber 3 days ago, I had every intention of signing the treaty. I wanted to be the diplomat who helped secure Earth's place in galactic civilization. But I had also done something that apparently none of the other delegates had done. I read the entire document." Hannah activated the chamber's holographic display, pulling up the same sections she had shown the council. "These clauses would require Earth to surrender 30% of our resources as tribute. Forever. With no expiration date. We would have no say in how those resources are used. The Council could demand more at any time by simply reclassifying our development status." A representative from the African Federation stood. "But surely negotiation is possible? We could request modifications." "I tried," Hannah replied. "Chairman Vex refused to even discuss changes. Lord Tamine told me Earth exists in the Council because they allow it, and that we should be grateful for whatever terms we are offered." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Hannah continued, her voice growing stronger. "More concerning is Section 7431, which grants the Council authority to relocate our population if they deem it necessary for strategic stability. That means if the Council decides they want our solar system for military bases or resource extraction, they can simply move us somewhere else. No appeal. No negotiation. No consent required." The murmurs grew louder. Representatives began pulling up the treaty on their own devices, scrolling through the sections Hannah had highlighted. "I know what some of you are thinking," Hannah said. "That I should have signed and dealt with problems later. That refusing the Council puts Earth at risk of isolation or worse. You are probably right about the risks. But I kept thinking about history. About every time a powerful nation told a weaker one to accept unfair terms, for their own good. About every treaty signed under pressure that led to generations of suffering." She looked directly at the cameras, knowing her words were being broadcast across Earth. "My grandmother was 8 years old when soldiers came to her village. They said they were there to help, to bring civilization and order. They took everything her family owned and called it taxation. They took her older brother for mandatory service and he never came back. They told her people they should be grateful for the protection and guidance of their superiors." Hannah's voice cracked slightly. She spent the rest of her life fighting to reclaim what was taken. She died 2 years ago, but before she passed she made me promise something. She said, "Never let anyone tell you that surrendering freedom is the price of safety. That lie has killed more people than all the wars in history." The chamber was completely silent now. I refuse to dishonor her memory and the memory of everyone who fought for our right to self-determination by signing away Earth's sovereignty, Hannah concluded. If this body chooses to disavow my decision, I will accept whatever consequences follow. But I will not apologize for defending the principles that define us as a species. She stepped back from the podium. For a moment nothing happened. Then a representative from the South Asian coalition began to clap. Another joined. Then dozens more. Within seconds half the chamber was applauding. The other half sat in stony silence. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Representatives argued passionately on both sides. Some pointed to Earth's dependence on Council technology and trade. Their Mars colonies needed Vex life support systems. Their defensive satellites used Corthan power cells. Their medical facilities relied on drugs synthesized with alien equipment. Others countered with evidence from Dr. Yoon's leaked files. They read testimonies from species who had signed similar treaties decades ago and were still trapped in tributary relationships, their worlds slowly being drained while the Council promised things would improve eventually. Outside the Parliament building, the crowds grew larger. Millions gathered in cities across Earth, watching the debate on public screens. Arguments broke out. In some places, protests turned violent. Police struggled to maintain order. Inside the chamber, exhaustion began to show on everyone's faces. Representatives who had started the day with clear convictions found themselves wavering. The weight of the decision pressed down on them all. Finally, at 2 a.m. local time, Secretary General Kim called for the vote. The question appeared on every representative's screen. Do you support Ambassador Park's refusal to sign the Galactic Peace Treaty? The voting took 5 minutes. Each representative entered their decision privately, though everyone knew the results would be public within seconds. The display showed the tally climbing. 50%, 60%, 70%. When the final count appeared, the chamber erupted in chaos once more. 83% in favor of supporting Hannah's decision. Earth had voted to stand alone against the galaxy rather than surrender its sovereignty. Hannah felt tears streaming down her face as representatives rushed forward to shake her hand or embrace her. She had expected to face trial. Instead, her world had chosen principle over security. Secretary General Kim found her in the crowd and spoke quietly in her ear. Now comes the hard part. The Council will respond to this vote within hours. We need to prepare. Hannah nodded, wiping her eyes. She had won this battle. But the war was just beginning. 3 weeks after Earth's Parliament voted to support her decision, Hannah stood in the command center of New Horizons Station and watched ships arrive through the viewport. The station had been abandoned for nearly a century, a relic from an earlier era of galactic exploration. Now it was being hastily repaired to host the most important diplomatic meeting in recorded history. The first ship to arrive bore the colors of the Rylan Concordat. Ambassador Kree emerged from the docking tube, her mantis-like body moving with nervous energy. She was followed by 2 advisors who carried data crystals containing evidence of Corthan mining operations that had poisoned 3 Rylan ocean worlds. Ambassador Park, Kree clicked her mandibles in the Rylan gesture of respect. My government debates even now whether I should be here. Half our ministers fear Council retaliation. But I told them we have been afraid for too long. More ships arrived over the next hours. The Tovan brought detailed records of children taken for educational programs who had returned broken or not at all. The Myra shared telepathic recordings of their cities being demolished to make space for Corthan military installations. 12 species total, each carrying the weight of decades of quiet suffering. But they were not alone. As Hannah had hoped, Earth's stand had inspired others. 6 additional species arrived, ones who had not yet been targeted by Council exploitation but who recognized the pattern forming. They saw what the treaty meant for their own futures and chose to act before it was too late. Dr. Yoon Suho arrived on a small research vessel, officially as an independent scientist rather than a Vex representative. His presence was dangerous. The Vex Collective had issued a warrant for his arrest after his leaked documents spread across galactic networks. But he had information the Coalition desperately needed. The Council is in chaos, Suho explained during the first private meeting. The reformist faction led by Ambassador Mayan controls perhaps 25% of the Council delegates. They want genuine change but lack the courage to break away entirely. Lord Tamin and the hardliners have maybe 40%. They want to crush this coalition by any means necessary. The rest are moderates trying to hold everything together. Hannah studied the holographic display showing Council voting blocks. What about Chairman Vex? Where does he stand? Vex cares only about preserving his own power, Suho said. Right now he sees the coalition as the greater threat. But if enough species defect, the math changes. A council representing only half the galaxy has no legitimacy. Vex will shift positions to save himself. Admiral Lee Jiho, who had arrived from Earth with a small military escort, leaned forward. How long before Taemin loses patience with diplomacy? Days, not weeks, Suho replied grimly. He is already moving fleet assets toward coalition borders. If these negotiations fail, he will strike. The formal negotiations began the following morning. Chairman Vex arrived with a delegation of 20 council species, his ships bristling with weapons as a not-so-subtle reminder of council power. Lord Taemin came separately, his dreadnought taking position above the station where everyone could see it. The negotiating chamber was a simple circular room that had once been the station's main conference space. Hannah sat at one side of the table with her coalition representatives. Vex and Taemin sat opposite, with Ambassador Mayan positioned uncomfortably between the two groups. This gathering is irregular, Vex began, his 4 eyes scanning the coalition delegates. The proper venue for diplomatic discussions is the council chamber. By meeting here, you legitimize illegal defection from galactic authority. We are not defectors, Hannah replied calmly. We are sovereign species exercising our right to refuse an unjust agreement. This meeting occurs here because you refuse to negotiate modifications to the treaty. Taemin slammed one armored fist on the table. There is nothing to negotiate. The treaty stands as written. You either accept it or face the consequences of isolation. Ambassador Kree's mandibles clicked sharply. The consequences of accepting are worse than isolation. My people have endured 50 years of resource extraction that violated every principle of fair trade. Our oceans are poisoned. Our children develop mutations from the chemical runoff of your mining operations. And when we complain, you tell us this is the price of galactic membership. Unsubstantiated accusations, Vex said dismissively. Kree activated her data crystal. Holographic images filled the chamber. Aerial views of Rylan oceans turned black with pollution. Medical scans of deformed Rylan children, financial records showing resources extracted versus compensation received. The numbers were devastating. For every unit of rare minerals taken from Rylan worlds, they received less than 1% of market value in return. Other coalition representatives added their own evidence. The Tovan played audio recordings of their children crying in council re-education facilities. The Myra shared telepathic impressions of fear and loss as their cities were demolished. Species after species presented proof of systematic exploitation hidden behind the language of cooperation and development. Ambassador Mayan watched the evidence with visible distress. His species, the Vorin, had not directly participated in the exploitation but had certainly benefited from it. He stood slowly, drawing attention from both sides of the table. I have served on the council for 32 years, Mayan said quietly. I believed we were building a better galaxy. That our power came with responsibility to guide younger species toward prosperity and peace. I see now that I was either a fool or a willing accomplice to something terrible. Taemin turned to glare at him. Sit down, Mayan. Do not embarrass yourself. No, Mayan replied. I will not sit while truth is spoken. He looked at the coalition delegates. Everything you have presented is accurate. I have seen the reports buried in council archives. I have attended closed sessions where officials laughed about how easily they manipulated treaty language to exploit developing worlds. I told myself it was necessary for stability. That strong species had a duty to control weak ones for everyone's benefit. He paused, his skin shifting through colors that indicated deep shame in Vorin culture. I was wrong. This council has become exactly what it was created to prevent, an empire that justifies cruelty through bureaucracy. The chamber fell silent. For a council ambassador to publicly condemn the organization was unprecedented. Vex recovered first. Ambassador Mayan, you are clearly exhausted and speaking rashly. Perhaps you should return to your quarters. I am speaking clearly for the first time in decades, Mayan countered. He turned to Hannah. What do you propose as an alternative? Tearing down the council creates a power vacuum that will lead to wars we cannot imagine. Hannah had prepared for this moment. She activated her own display, showing the framework document she had been drafting with coalition representatives. We call it the Sovereign Species Accord. 3 core principles: genuine self-determination, mutual defense without tribute, and fair trade negotiated between equals. She walked through the details. Member species would retain absolute sovereignty over their own worlds and systems. Military cooperation would be voluntary, organized through joint defense agreements rather than mandatory service. Trade would occur at market rates with transparent accounting. This is fantasy, Tameen scoffed. You imagine weak species can defend themselves against real threats? That trade can function without central authority to enforce agreements? You are children playing at government. Perhaps, Hannah acknowledged. But we would rather fail honestly than succeed through exploitation. And we are not as weak as you assume. Admiral Jiho stood and activated tactical displays. Earth has been sharing military technology with coalition species. Our defensive innovations, their expertise in various fields, the Rylan have shield technology more advanced than anything the Korthan use. The Tovan possess sensor systems that can track fleet movements across multiple star systems. The Myra understand Council tactical doctrine better than most Council officers. He zoomed in on specific systems. We have been conducting joint training exercises for 2 weeks. Our forces are smaller than the Council's, but we are unified in purpose in ways the Council has not been for centuries. Attack any of us and you attack all of us. Tameen stood abruptly, his massive frame looming over the table. Then you choose war. Very well. My fleet will demonstrate the price of defiance. Wait, Vex interjected, holding up a hand. His calculating expression had shifted. He pulled up displays showing galactic networks. Before we escalate, perhaps Lord Tameen should be aware of current developments. The screens showed news broadcast from across the galaxy. Protests on Voran worlds demanding council reform. Demonstrations on Vex Prime calling for investigation into tribute practices. Even on some Korthan colony worlds, citizens were questioning official narratives about the coalition. More critically, 8 additional species had just announced their intention to join the Sovereign Species Accord. The coalition now represented nearly half of the Council's former membership. Vex's 4 eyes fixed on Hannah. You have been busy, Ambassador. People recognize injustice when they see it, Hannah replied. Your treaty was built on the assumption that weak species would accept exploitation rather than risk confrontation. You assumed wrong. Tameen looked ready to overturn the table, but Vex placed a restraining hand on his arm. The chairman was doing calculations, political arithmetic that determined his next move. This session is adjourned, Vex announced. We will reconvene in 3 days. The council requires time to discuss these developments. As the council delegation departed, Hannah allowed herself a small breath of relief. They had survived the first meeting without war breaking out. But she knew Tameen's patience was finite. That night, as Hannah reviewed intelligence reports in her quarters, a priority message arrived. 8 more species had officially applied to join the coalition. By morning, the number would reach 56. The council was collapsing. And everyone knew that cornered empires were the most dangerous kind. The alert came at 3 a.m, station time. Hannah jolted awake in her quarters aboard New Horizon Station as emergency klaxons blared through the corridors. She stumbled to her communications terminal, still half asleep, and found Admiral Jiho's face on the screen. Delos is under attack, Jiho said without preamble. Korthan fleet. 300 ships. They jumped in 20 minutes ago and are demanding immediate surrender. Hannah's exhaustion vanished instantly. Delos was a crucial world. Its factories produced precision manufacturing components that dozens of species relied on for everything from medical equipment to starship engines. The planet had announced its intention to join the coalition just 2 days earlier, and Hannah had celebrated it as a major victory. Now that victory was turning into disaster. How long before they start bombing? Hannah asked. Lord Tameen gave them 1 hour to submit. That was 18 minutes ago. Hannah pulled up tactical displays while throwing on her clothes. The Delos system showed 300 red markers surrounding the planet, a Korthan armada large enough to reduce the world to ash. The planet's own defenses were minimal, maybe 20 patrol craft designed to ward off pirates, not resist a military invasion. Send the call, Hannah said. Every coalition ship. Everything we have. Get them to Delos now. Jiho nodded grimly. Already done. But Hannah, our ships are scattered across 40 star systems. Even at maximum speed, most won't arrive for hours. We'll be fighting piecemeal against a concentrated force. Then we hold until everyone arrives. How many ships can we get there in the next hour? Jiho consulted his own displays. Earth's 3rd fleet is closest, 8 frigates and a battlecruiser. The Rylan have a patrol squadron nearby, maybe 12 ships. Tovan scouts are in the neighboring system. Maybe 40 ships total within an hour. 100 within 2 hours. Everything else will take longer. 40 ships against 300. The math was horrifying, But Hannah had known this moment would come eventually. Tamine had been looking for an excuse to demonstrate council power. Delos had given him that excuse. "Tell our ships to jump immediately," Hannah ordered. "And get me a channel to the Delos government." The face of Minister Yuna appeared on screen, a middle-aged woman whose terror was barely concealed behind diplomatic composure. "Ambassador Park, the Korthan are demanding we renounce our application to the coalition. They say if we submit now they will withdraw peacefully. But if we resist, they will bombard you anyway once you are defenseless," Hannah finished. "Minister, help is coming. Can you evacuate civilians to underground shelters? We began evacuations when the fleet arrived, but we have 18 million people in our major cities. There is not enough time." Yuna's voice cracked. "Ambassador, I do not want my world to burn because of a political decision. Perhaps if we submit." "Submission will only delay the inevitable," Hannah interrupted. "The moment you are defenseless, Tamine will make an example of you to terrify other species considering defection. Your only chance is to fight." She hated saying it. Hated knowing that people would die because of decisions she had set in motion. But the alternative was worse. A galaxy where species lived in perpetual fear, accepting exploitation because resistance seemed impossible. The first coalition ships began arriving 37 minutes after the alert. Earth's third fleet dropped out of hyperspace on the far side of the Delos system, their arrival detected immediately by Korthan sensors. The Ryland squadron appeared moments later, followed by scattered Tovan and Myra vessels. Admiral Jiho transmitted from the bridge of the ESS Incheon, Earth's aging battlecruiser. "All coalition forces, this is Fleet Commander Jiho. We are outnumbered 7-1. Standard tactics will not work. Execute Protocol Defiance." Hannah watched from New Horizons Command Center as the battle unfolded across holographic displays. Protocol Defiance was the strategy coalition military planners had developed over weeks of joint exercises, asymmetric warfare designed to neutralize the Korthans' technological advantages. The Earth frigates launched thousands of small drones, each one barely larger than a human fist. They swarmed toward the Korthan fleet in clouds too dense for point defense systems to track. The drones did not carry weapons, they carried electromagnetic jammers. Within minutes, Korthan targeting systems began failing as the swarm overwhelmed their sensors with false readings. Ryland ships activated their advanced shielding technology and moved into close range with Korthan vessels. Their shields operated on different frequencies than standard defensive systems, rendering Korthan weapons significantly less effective. Instead of engaging in long-range bombardment, the Ryland ships moved alongside enemy vessels and grappled them with magnetic harpoons. The Tovan deployed their sophisticated sensor arrays to track every Korthan ship's position and transmit that data to all coalition forces. With perfect battlefield awareness, coalition commanders could coordinate attacks on isolated targets and avoid Korthan concentrations. Myra telepods, immune to electronic jamming, provided instant communication between coalition ships. Orders that would normally take seconds to relay through conventional channels arrived instantaneously in commanders' minds. The battle became chaos. Korthan commanders were trained for traditional fleet engagements, organized formations, long-range fire, overwhelming force applied systematically. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight according to established doctrine. Coalition ships darted in and out of engagement range, striking quickly and retreating before Korthan weapons could lock on. When Korthan vessels pursued, they found themselves separated from their fleet and surrounded by coordinated attacks. Drone swarms rendered sophisticated targeting computers useless, forcing Korthan gunners to aim manually against fast-moving targets. Hannah watched as more coalition ships arrived in waves. The Vex scientist Suho had been right, not all Vex supported the Council's aggression. A squadron of Vex vessels arrived flying coalition colors, their crews defectors who had secretly been coordinating with the coalition for weeks. 4 hours into the battle, the tide began to turn. 37 Korthan ships had been disabled or destroyed. The coalition had lost 61 vessels, but reinforcements kept arriving. What had started as 40 ships against 300 had become nearly 200 coalition vessels surrounding an increasingly desperate Korthan force. Lord Tamine's flagship, the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, hung at the center of the Korthan formation. Hannah could imagine his rage as the battle slipped from his control. He had expected easy victory, a demonstration that would terrify potential coalition members. Instead, he was trapped in a grinding battle against an enemy that refused to be intimidated. The Korthan began retreating toward the edge of the system, fighting defensively as they withdrew. Coalition ships harassed them but did not pursue aggressively. Jiho's orders were clear. Drive them away, do not get drawn into a chase that could turn into an ambush. 6 hours after the first shots were fired, the Korthan fleet jumped to hyperspace. They left behind 43 destroyed or disabled vessels and thousands of dead crew. The coalition had lost 78 ships, with casualties approaching 20,000. But Delos was safe. The planet's city stood intact. Its people emerged from shelters to find their world still free. Hannah slumped in her chair, overwhelmed by exhaustion and grief. They had won, but the cost was staggering. 78 ships meant 78 crews, families who would receive notifications that their loved ones had died fighting for an ideal. Admiral Jiho's face appeared on her screen, his expression grim. We held them off. Barely. But Hannah, we cannot fight battles like this regularly. We expended munitions we cannot easily replace. Several ships are so badly damaged they may never fly again. And we only succeeded because our forces were relatively close to Delos. If Tamine attacks a more remote world, we may not arrive in time. I know, Hannah said quietly. But we proved something today. The Korthan can be beaten. They are not invincible. News of the Battle of Delos spread across galactic networks within hours. Footage showed coalition ships swarming Korthan vessels, drones overwhelming sophisticated defenses, species working together with precision that veteran military analysts found remarkable given their short time practicing joint operations. The impact was immediate. 7 more species announced their intention to join the coalition that same day. By the end of the week, the number reached 15. Species that had been afraid to defy the Council saw that resistance was possible, that the mighty Korthan Empire could be challenged. But the battle also hardened divisions. The Council's remaining members saw the coalition as an existential threat. Moderate voices calling for negotiation were drowned out by hardliners demanding total victory. 3 days after Delos, Ambassador Mayan sent Hannah a private message. The Council is fragmenting. The reformist faction is preparing to break away. We have been negotiating quietly, and I believe we can reach an agreement. But you must understand, if we leave the Council, Tamine will have nothing left to lose. He will escalate to total war. Hannah read the message 3 times, understanding the implications. The coalition was succeeding beyond her wildest hopes. But success meant pushing the Korthan Empire into a corner, and cornered enemies were the most dangerous kind. She looked at casualty reports from Delos, names scrolling past too quickly to read individually. 20,000 dead. That number would grow exponentially if Tamine decided to burn the galaxy rather than accept defeat. Hannah typed a response to Mayan. How many species will break away with you? 16, possibly 20. Enough to reduce the Council to irrelevance. But Tamine controls the largest military force in the galaxy. The question is not whether we can win politically. The question is whether we can survive what comes next. Outside Hannah's window, repair crews worked on damaged coalition vessels that had limped back to New Horizon. Engineers swarmed over hull breaches, replacing destroyed systems, preparing the ships to fight again. Because everyone knew Delos was just the beginning. The real war was still ahead. Lord Tamine stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and watched 4,000 warships assemble in formation. This was the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history, every vessel the Korthan Empire could spare, supplemented by ships from the few species still loyal to the Council, and rounded out by conscripted vessels from tributary worlds forced to contribute to the war effort. The target was New Horizon Station, the coalition's new capital. Tamine had spent 3 months planning this assault. No clever tactics would save the coalition this time. No asymmetric warfare or surprise reinforcements. Just overwhelming force applied until nothing remained but debris. All ships report ready, his tactical officer announced. We can begin the jump sequence on your command. Tamine allowed himself a thin smile. Execute. 4,000 ships vanished into hyperspace, emerging minutes later in the New Horizon system. The station hung in the distance, a small cluster of lights against the black. Surrounding it was the coalition fleet, roughly 1,000 vessels arranged in defensive formations. The odds were 4 to 1. This would be over quickly. All ships advance and engage, Tamine ordered. Destroy everything. The Korthan fleet began moving forward in perfect formation, a wall of firepower that should have been unstoppable. But as they closed to firing range, something strange began happening. On the bridge of the conscripted vessel Tovan Hope, Captain Jivan watched his crew work with quiet efficiency. They had been drilling this moment for months, waiting for the signal. When it came, a brief encoded message hidden in routine fleet communications. They moved. Engineering, kill the main power, Jivan ordered calmly. His chief engineer, a young woman named Suri, pulled 3 specific circuit breakers in sequence. The ship's lights flickered and died. Backup systems engaged, but they had been quietly sabotaged weeks ago. Within seconds, the Tovan Hope was drifting, weapons offline, engines dead. On 20 other conscripted Tovan vessels, the same scene played out simultaneously. Aboard the Myra destroyer Whisper, telepaths who had been forced to serve in the Korthan fleet reached out with their minds. Not to communicate, to interfere. They projected waves of disorientation and confusion toward nearby Korthan ships, disrupting the concentration of targeting officers and navigation crews. Weapons that should have hit their targets fired wild. Ships that should have maintained formation drifted off course. On vessels crewed by the Rylan, the Vex defectors, the Doran and dozens of other tributary species, similar acts of sabotage unfolded. Engineers disabled critical systems. Gunners aimed at empty space instead of coalition targets. Navigation officers fed false coordinates into their computers. Within 10 minutes of engagement, 300 ships in Tamin's fleet were disabled or operating at reduced capacity. Within 20 minutes, the number reached 500. On the Eternal Dominion's bridge, chaos erupted as reports flooded in from across the fleet. Sir, the entire Tovan contingent has gone dark, all power systems offline. Multiple Myra vessels reporting navigation failures. The Rylan squadron is breaking formation, they are turning their weapons on our ships. Tamin stared at the tactical display in disbelief. His perfect formation was dissolving into chaos. Ships he had counted on to form the hammer blow of his assault were either disabled or actively fighting against him. This is impossible, Tamin growled. Those crews were vetted. Loyal officers were placed on every conscripted vessel. His intelligence officer pulled up reports, her hands shaking. Sir, the loyal officers on the Tovan ships are reporting mutiny. Their crews have locked them out of ship systems. Similar reports coming from dozens of other vessels. Tamin understood then. The coalition had not just built a military alliance, they had infiltrated his own fleet. 4 months, probably since the first defections began, coalition operatives had been making contact with crews from tributary species. Species who had been forced to serve empires that exploited them. Who had been waiting for a chance to strike back. He had brought the seeds of his own defeat into battle with him. All Korthan vessels ignore the conscripted ships, Tamin ordered. Focus fire on coalition forces. We still outnumber them 3-1. But the damage was done. The perfectly coordinated assault had become a confused melee. Disabled ships drifted through the battle space, blocking firing lines and disrupting formations. Some conscripted vessels had not just disabled themselves, they had actively joined the coalition, turning their weapons against their former commanders. Admiral Jiho watched from the bridge of the Incheon as the Korthan formation fell apart. He had known about the sabotage plan, coalition intelligence had spent months organizing it, but even he was surprised by how effective it proved. All ships press the attack, Jiho ordered. Target the command vessels. If we can disable Tamin's flagship, the rest may lose cohesion. The coalition fleet surged forward. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned by the functioning Korthan vessels, but now the odds were closer to even. The battle that should have been a massacre became a desperate struggle. For 6 hours, ships traded fire in the cold void. Hulls ruptured. Reactors exploded. Escape pods scattered across the battlefield as crews abandoned dying vessels. The space around New Horizon Station became a graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. Hannah watched from the station's command center, her hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every explosion on the tactical display represented lives lost. She had started this chain of events by refusing to sign a treaty. Now thousands were dying because of that choice. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. It is from outside the battle space. Multiple ships jumping in, identifying as Vex Collective Fleet. Hannah's heart sank. If the Vex had come to reinforce Tamin, the battle was lost. The coalition fleet was already stretched to breaking point. But the ships that emerged from hyperspace did not join the Korthan formation. Instead, they positioned themselves between the two fleets, their weapons powered but not firing. A face appeared on the main display, Ambassador Rylan of the Vex Collective. Hannah recognized him from council meetings, though he looked different now. Older, tired, but determined. This ends now, Rylan announced, his transmission broadcast to every ship in the system. The Vex Collective has watched the Korthan Empire pursue this war of conquest disguised as peacekeeping. We have watched tributary species exploited and suffering species ignored. We have been complicit in injustice for too long. He paused, letting his words register. The Vex Collective hereby recognizes the sovereignty of the Free Systems Congress. We call for an immediate ceasefire. Lord Tamine, if you continue this assault, you will fight not just the coalition but the Vex as well. And you know your damaged fleet cannot prevail against us both. On the Eternal Dominion, Lord Tamine stared at the screen in fury. You dare betray the Council? The Vex and Korthan have been allies for 3 centuries. We were allies when the Council served justice, Ryland replied. That Council is dead. What remains is an empire that serves only itself. The Vex will not be party to genocide. Tamine looked at his tactical displays. His fleet was crippled by sabotage, exhausted from hours of combat, and now faced the prospect of fighting the second most powerful military force in the galaxy. The math was impossible. All Korthan vessels cease fire and retreat to the edge of the system, Tamine ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Prepare for jump to hyperspace. The Korthan ships began withdrawing, damaged and defeated. As they retreated, the conscripted vessels that had sabotaged themselves began sending messages to the coalition, requesting asylum. Thousands of crew members from a dozen species who had finally broken free from their oppressors. When the last Korthan ship jumped to hyperspace, a ragged cheer went up in New Horizons command center. They had won. Against impossible odds they had survived. But Hannah felt no joy, only exhaustion. She looked at the casualty reports scrolling across displays. 4,000 coalition personnel dead. Twice that many wounded. And on the Korthan side, losses were even higher, not just from battle damage but from the internal rebellions that had crippled dozens of ships. Admiral Jiho appeared on screen from the Inshan, his face streaked with soot from a fire that had broken out on his bridge. We held them. I cannot believe we actually held them. At what cost? Hannah asked quietly. Jiho had no answer to that. Over the following weeks, the galaxy transformed. The Vex Collective's defection shattered what remained of the old council. 16 more species followed them, some joining the Free Systems Congress, others forming the new Galactic Commonwealth, a reformed version of the council that eliminated tribute systems and recognized genuine sovereignty. Lord Tamine and the Korthan Empire retreated into isolation, refusing to acknowledge either government's legitimacy. They controlled perhaps 8 star systems now, a shadow of their former domain but still dangerous. 5 years after the Battle of New Horizon, Hannah stood in a classroom aboard the station and looked at faces representing 200 different species. Young beings who had grown up in a galaxy transformed by the choices made in those desperate months. What is power? Hannah asked her students as she did at the start of every term. Answers came quickly. Military strength. Economic resources. Technology. All true, Hannah acknowledged. But power, fundamentally, is the ability to say no. To refuse injustice even when refusal seems impossible. Every free species in this galaxy exists because someone, somewhere, decided that freedom mattered more than safety. She pulled up historical footage, herself standing in the council chamber, refusing to sign the treaty. The Battle of Delos. The saboteurs disabling ships from within Tamine's fleet. The Vex arriving to enforce the ceasefire. We did not create a perfect galaxy, Hannah told her students. We created a free one. And freedom requires constant defense. Your generation will face challenges we cannot imagine. But remember this, change is possible. Small species can challenge great empires. And one person's courage can inspire billions. After class, Hannah walked to her favorite observation window. Through it, she could see ships from hundreds of species docking and departing. The galaxy was not at peace. There were still conflicts, still injustices to address. But it was fundamentally different than it had been. Dr. Yoon Suho found her there as he often did. He had become chief scientific advisor to the Free Systems Congress, coordinating research across member species. Do you ever regret it? Suho asked. All the death and destruction that followed your choice? Hannah considered the question carefully. Every day. But I also see what we have now. Species working together as equals. No more tribute. No more forced relocations. Justice that applies to everyone, not just the powerful. She smiled sadly. The cost was terrible. But the alternative would have been worse. A slow death of the spirit for every weak species in the galaxy. On the wall of her office hung a memorial plaque with 800,000 names. Every being who had died in the struggle. She had read every name at least once, carrying their weight with her always. Freedom had been purchased with their sacrifice. And every day billions of beings across the galaxy lived free because of it? That Hannah thought had to be enough.